want to take another look in Matthew chapter 13 at the parable. This is a whole chapter of parables, of course. It's the parables of the kingdom. And it's the beginning of the parable ministry of Jesus, as you know. There will also not only be the parables of the kingdom, there will be the parables of the judgment, which will come in chapter 24 and 25 of Matthew. So he told lots of parables, and he begins at this point. Obviously, the disciples have become aware that he has changed and shifted in his whole entire approach to ministry. And so they have come to him and said, "Hey, what's the deal? Why are you doing this?" And he said, "I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm trying to really reveal something. I'm not trying to keep anything from anybody. I'm not concealing anything. I'm trying to plant something." See, all the theology that I've been teaching the Pharisees, they didn't buy into. All the logic I gave them, it didn't register with them. I tried to explain the whole thing, all the arguments I've given them. Hey, it didn't seem to get through to them. So I've decided I'm just going to tell them some stories. And maybe this story that I tell will be like a seed that gets deep inside of them, and they will remember the story, and one day the Spirit of God will just knock them upside the head with this story, and they'll see truth. Wouldn't that be great? So I'm telling stories. So verse 31 is one of these stories in chapter 13. He's told two up to this time and explained them himself. Obviously, verse 31, this parable he didn't need to explain. Verse 31, another parable he put forth to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches." What's that all about? We've been discussing the idea that this is an idiom, which is a cultural phrase that has additional meaning attached to it because of the culture than what it really says. And an example of that is you do something really great and we look at you and say, "You hit a home run." But we're not playing baseball at all. So where did that come from? It's an idiom. This parable is based on an idiom. And the idiom is the mustard seed. And they looked at a mustard seed, which was the smallest seed they knew anything about. And they looked at it and said, "This is the symbol of everything that's small." And they clustered around the mustard seed, anything that's small. So when they looked at a short guy, he said, "About as tall as a mustard seed," which has nothing to do with a mustard seed, but it's an idiom. So in the parable, Jesus is relating this mustard seed idea, which you'll remember if you had anything less than a mustard seed, you wouldn't have anything at all. So it's the least you can have and have something without having nothing. Mustard seed. Now the principle, the key to the parable is all wrapped up in the words least and greater. Note them again. "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds." So the word least in the Greek language is the Greek word mikros, which is least. And it's totally, absolutely related to seeds. So he's not talking about anything but seed. And it's a mustard seed that is the least. Then he moves into greater. So the heart of the parable is least and greater. Least is totally focused on mustard seed, the seed idea. And then the greater, you'll note in the word, is, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes like a tree. So he focuses the entire word greater, the idea of greater, on the herbs. And the word greater is meson. So mikros and meson, mikros, least, focuses on seed. Meson, greater, focuses on herbs. In fact, I want to illustrate it for you. It's like a tree. And they didn't know anything about trees. except from the mustard seed. Biggest of all the trees. In fact, birds come and nest in it. That's how big it is. Least, greater. That's the heart of the parable. Now note there is a connection between the least and the greater. This is really important. This is right at the heart of the parable. There is a connection between the least and the greater. In other words, it's not just setting up, oh, this is least, and oh, that's greater, with no interaction between them. For instance, I look at a penny. Oh, there's a penny, it's least. Oh, there's a cloud, it's greater. But there's no connection between a penny and a cloud. He's not doing that in the parable. It's going to be a test after this service. He's not doing that in the parable. Oh, I got a pebble, I got a stone in my shoe, but it's the least of all my problems. Because I really got financial problems. Oh, brother. Glad we're taking an offering tonight. Just kidding. So the pebble in my shoe has nothing to do with my finances. That's true. That's not what he's doing. See, the least is all connected to the greater. In fact, the least somehow creates the atmosphere, has the resource, has the power, has the force, has the dynamic that creates the greater. And if there wasn't for the least, there wouldn't be any greater because they're connected. Let me read it to you again. You can see this. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. But when it is grown, that's connection, folks. When it is grown. So what comes out of the least? The greater. So the greater is a direct response and result of the least. And if you didn't have the least, you wouldn't have the greater. That's the heart of the parable. Now, we've been discussing the idea that this parable is not just a story. You know, you read a book that has short stories. You don't just stick this in there. This has got to be seen in the context. The context of the parable is chapter 12. And we've walked through chapter 12. He has had an entire day, Sabbath day, with the Pharisees. They have been at him, teeth and toenail. I mean, from the very beginning, when the disciples picked grain for breakfast, they got after him. Oh, you can't do that on the Sabbath day. They were after him. All the rule stuff. They were after him. They were going to stone the disciples. Jesus said, hey, whoa, back off, and gave them 3 phenomenal teachings on that subject. One was right out of the Old Testament. 2 was a quotation of what God said in the Old Testament. 3 was their own example of the priest working on the Sabbath day. So he nailed them on that. They went from there to the synagogue, and he healed a withered hand on the synagogue. You can't do that. Medical techniques are not allowed on the Sabbath day. And Jesus said, what? And he gave them, obviously theology didn't work, so he gave them a practical illustration of sheep gets in the ditch on the Sabbath day, you get that thing out. A man gets in the ditch on the Sabbath day, and you leave him there. I think there's something wrong with your thinking. He went out and healed the entire multitude of handicapped, sick people, and he healed them all, it says. And they came out and said, oh, he's full of the devil. Then they had the nerve to come around and say, why don't you do a magic trick for us and we might believe? And he says, what? I'm not going to do that. Not a chance. This parable is told in the context of that. Because everything they saw, the perspective of what they saw, how they think, is all messed up. So he tells this parable, saying, please adjust your thinking. And we spent 3 weeks talking about perspective. Why do you see things the way you see them? One guy sees one thing, another guy sees the same thing. One guy thinks it's great, another guy thinks it's terrible. What's the difference? It's what's inside of you that makes the difference. So what you see through your eyes is determined by the nature that you have within. So Jesus is turning to the Pharisees saying, guys, you think backwards because you are backwards in your nature. So if something could happen in you, which is the new covenant that has come and could reverse you, could do something dynamic in your heart and your life so you could see things the way they are, but you miss it. See, they saw their nation as the favorite of God. We're Jews. We're the chosen ones of God. God loves us more than anybody else. They isolated themselves, built walls, cut everybody else out. Why? Because they are the chosen ones of God. And then when Jesus came in chapter 12, and this prophecy is quoted all about the Gentiles, that God has literally come, not for them, and the only reason he's come and using them is to get to everybody else, because God is including everybody in his plan. They couldn't see that because their perspective was off. And he called them on it. Now, the reason they couldn't see that is because of this principle that's found here in the heart of the parable, which we want to talk about tonight. He is not attempting to correct actions. I don't know why that's so hard for us. God is mad at me. Why? Because I did that. No. It doesn't have anything to do with what you do. It has everything to do with what you are, because what you do is what you are. So what does God want to change in my life? Slap my hand, let me do better. Oh, I'll start coming to church. Oh, I'll change this. Oh, I'll start reading my Bible. Okay, I won't say that word anymore. Are you happy now? That's not his deal. God is not out to make bad people good. He isn't out to make wrong people right, because you could be so right you're wrong. Hasn't that happened in my life 1,000 times? Oh, I'm right. Well, I was right. But right is not always right. Why? Because there's something underneath all of that. And there's something underneath all the actions. And so when God comes and Jesus confronts in chapter 12 the picking grain on the Sabbath day, and they want to stone the disciples, he says, I'm not out to change that. Because if you came and said, okay, you've convinced us, we'll change the rule. You can pick grain on the Sabbath day now. So go to it, pick grain. We'll accept that. That wouldn't change how Jesus felt or what they needed, because it wasn't about grain on the Sabbath day. It was how you perceived that. Would you be open to the perspective of Jesus? Well, this is the way I've been raised. Well, it's the way we are in Tennessee. Would you be open to be like Jesus and see things like he sees them? Would you just be open to that? Just be open. So he gives this phenomenal principle. Now, what is the principle? Well, let's start with this, comparison. Again, you got least and you got greater. But remember, it's not a comparison of, oh, that's small, this is large. It's the connection. Got to keep that in mind. But there is a comparison. Now, here's what I've discovered. This least and greater is found all through the teachings of Jesus, which is kind of neat. Like this isn't the first time this idea shows up. And in this parable, you are given phenomenal insight in the other times that Jesus uses the least and greater language, because it's the same principle. Here, he's putting it in story form to implant it into the inner part of the heart of man. What is the principle he is implanting? Turn back with me just 2 pages. It's the Matthew 11 thing. In Matthew 11, what you've got Jesus ministering. He sent his disciples out there ministering. He sent them out in pairs. And while they were out ministering, he went to their hometowns and he began to minister in their hometowns. And John the Baptist's disciples came to Jesus and said, are you the Messiah or are you not? Are you the one that we're looking for? Are you not? John is in jail by this time, and he has sent us to ask you this. And Jesus gives an answer, phenomenal answer. And then he moves into talking to the crowds about John the Baptist. Interesting. And as he's talking to the crowds about John the Baptist, he gives you the feeling that he's afraid that the crowds are kind of down on John, like John really messed up. Why? He's in jail. Only had 6 months ministry, and when your ministry only lasts 6 months and they put you in jail and then cut off your head, you say, I don't think this was successful. I mean, you would kind of feel that way, wouldn't you? So John is feeling depressed and like, hey, maybe I blew it. Maybe I missed the whole thing. What's the deal here? Comes to Jesus. So Jesus is defending John the Baptist. Whew, wouldn't that be great to have Jesus defend you? And he's talking to this crowd and saying, don't you be down on John. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. I'll come and get you. So don't do it. And he's defending John, which is really neat. And in all of this defense of John, you come down to verse 11, and he brings up the least and greatest language. Interesting. And here's what he says, verse 11. Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist. Woo! Isn't that a phenomenal applause? I can see it all now. They're all applauding. The greatest. Did you read it? Born of women is John the Baptist. Now, what's he discussing there? He's discussing an Old Testament, an Old Covenant. We know all the Old Covenant, the law. And guess who did the best of all the people in the Old Testament to do what they ought to do? John the Baptist. Which has kind of encouraged me because he was a weirdo. So maybe God isn't interested in the straight-laced. I mean, John never had a suit and tie on. John never had robes. John didn't he didn't run in the circles of he couldn't go to Applebee's. But he could now anyhow because they're closed. But John the Baptist, he didn't run in any of those circles, you know. He dressed strangely. He never cut his hair. He was just a weird guy. And yet, he kept the law of God better, more, greater than anybody else. Wow. He was the best. Now, you understand all that's on a measurement deal, which we like. I'm more spiritual than you are. How do I know? I read my Bible more than you. Even Jeremiah. So, hey, I'm more spiritual. I come to church more than you. I minister more than you. Therefore, I do more than you. And since I do more than you, I'm greater than you. See, all that's on a performance. It's Old Covenant. Now, look what he does. He says, in the rest of the verse 11, chapter 11, verse 11, So the greatest is who? John the Baptist, who did all this stuff. So when you read that, of course, you automatically think, oh, I need to work harder. I need to do better. Oh, I need to give more money. Great idea. I need to really try harder. That's what you feel, right? And then he comes along and says, but he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Did you get that? But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So now we've moved over here. See, over here is the old covenant with the law structure. And John the Baptist is the greatest over here. Why? He does better than anybody else. Over here is the kingdom, and guess what? The least guy in the kingdom is greater than the greatest guy in the old covenant. Well, who is this guy who's least? His name is He. Well, who is He? I don't know. Could be anybody. Therefore, it is everybody. So everybody in the kingdom is least. Why? Because you can't get in the kingdom unless you're least. Because the kingdom is all about a mustard seed that is least. Wouldn't it be interesting if that's my problem? I don't want to be least. I like the applause. Would you pat me on the back? Would you tell me how great I am? I like that. So I still live in this world of being, attempting to be the greater, which keeps me out of the kingdom, because in the kingdom, the only way to be in the kingdom is least, because it's mustard seed stuff. Isn't that interesting? Are you willing to be least? Well, you don't understand how smart I am. Well, go compete with John the Baptist. You don't understand how talented I am. Wow. You're a Pharisee with wrong thinking. You don't understand the principle. It's the least that gets you in the kingdom. That's the comparison. Now I got to hurry, but I want to go back to the connection. These two are connected. In other words, I don't want you to think that over here in the old covenant, we're done with that. Now we're going to move into a whole new deal, because that didn't work. And there's some indication of that in the book of Hebrews. You can read in the book of Hebrews chapter 6 that the way that was in the old covenant, the old system of the law was like a garment that you wear, a shirt that you wear, and it is worn out, he says. And when a shirt is worn out and you got holes in the sleeves and it's got stains on it, this is a poor example because I like those kind of shirts and continue to wear them. But anyway, you throw it away because it's obsolete. He says that's the old covenant. This whole system is obsolete, and we've moved to a new system. But while that is true in some sense, there is another sense where these two are connected, and the new, which is the kingdom of God, has come out of the old. See, the old did a phenomenal thing for us. It taught us we're least. Now, come on, you can identify with this, every one of you. I'm least. How do you know that? Because I tried my best and it didn't work. See, the failures in my life tell me, the sins that I feel guilty over tell me, the blow-ups in my life tell me, the loss of temper in my life tells me, the broken relationships in my home tell me, the messes in my family tell me, I'm not John the Baptist. So if I have any chance at all, this least thing has got to take place in my life. Because it's in the least of the kingdom that the growth takes place into the tree. So this has got to take place in my life. So this over here is not done away with in that sense. It was valuable and became the foundation that was fulfilled in this new thing. And this taught me that I am least. Think about this. How many failures do you have until you think, maybe I'm not adequate? How many anger management classes does a guy have to take until he says, I don't think I can control my anger? How many broken relationships do you have to have until you finally look at yourself and say, maybe it's me? Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm least. And the minute that happens, according to Jesus' principle, I've got a shot at this. Because when I can become least, I might get in the kingdom. Because the kingdom is all about the least guy receiving the resource of his presence that grows him into a tree. See, the old was all wrapped up in, I'm greater. Why are you greater? I am greater because I'm great. Well, yeah. Look at the people that applaud me. Look at the people that serve me. Look at the people that bow at my feet. Look at the people under my control. Hey, I'm great. This tells you. Jesus says, wrong thinking. Let me tell you how it really is. You are not great because you have all these people serving you. That's not the measure of your greatness. The measure of your greatness is not how many people serve you. The measure of your greatness is how many people you serve, because you're to become a tree in which the birds nest. That's a different thought. Who is willing to become who you are, which is least, that you might become the great? Well, what's the content of greatness? Oh, that's the parable. See, the content of the great is the least that has been filled with the resource of Jesus, who produces your greatness. And anytime your greatness is produced by or out of or brought about by your John the Baptist technique, you're not in the kingdom. You've stepped out. What can I say, Jesus? Spend my whole life trying to get people to applaud. Try to please people. Work my way up the ladder. Become important. Become valuable. All the time you've been trying to get me to see that without you, I'm nowhere, because I was created by you to be filled with you, that in the combination of you and me, in that merger, in your presence and my presence, when we come together, when you fill me in that merger of you and me, the kingdom is born. And in my leastness, you begin to flow to grow me into a tree. What is your destiny? Your plan for my life? Could I turn you loose in me? Could I come with my hands down? Could I throw in the towel? Could I really admit wholeheartedly, I'm not adequate? Could I quit trying to reform, change that, do better there, get over that, stop that? Could I just be yours? And could you fill me? And in the leastness of my life, could you grow a tree? Heads are bowed. Hey, you don't want to miss this. Pharisees did. After all of his instruction, they didn't get any of it. They missed the whole thing. They went on with their, don't pick grain on the Sabbath day. And they missed him. But you can't have him unless you will embrace your leastness. So if you kneel here tonight at this altar, you're saying, I'm least. I can't make it on my own. I'm not adequate. I'm incapable. I've got one shot. And that's Jesus. Come on, you're going to be in the kingdom? Moments of seeking. Hey, no pressure. Just think about it. Be obedient.